Tonight, shipyard foreman Aaron Walsh discovers his iron-fisted boss, Margaret Flynn, collapsed in her office, drunk and delirious, with mysterious blue paint staining her trembling hands. As he carries her through the November storm to safety, her carefully constructed walls crumble, revealing a woman haunted by secrets that could destroy them both. What Aaron doesn't know is that this one act of kindness will uncover a hidden world of art, wealth, and heartbreak, and change his struggling family's life forever. Stay with me until the end of this incredible journey and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The November rain hammered coastal shipyard like bullets against steel, each drop exploding into spray that mixed salt air with the metallic tang of rust and industrial oil. Aaron Walsh pulled his collar higher against the storm as he made his final rounds through the empty facility, his boots echoing through cavernous workshops that had fallen silent for the night. At 32, he'd spent half his life in these buildings, working his way up from welder to foreman, through sheer determination and calloused hands that knew every rivet and beam in the place. The administrative building should have been empty by now. It was past 9, and even the most dedicated office workers had fled hours ago when the storm warnings escalated. But as Aaron approached the executive wing, a slice of golden light beneath Margaret Flynn's office door stopped him cold. His stomach clenched with familiar dread. Working late was one thing, but Margaret Flynn never left her office light on by accident. Everything the woman did was calculated, precise, controlled. Aaron hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. Margaret Flynn, or the Iron Lady, as the workers called her behind her back, was not a woman who invited casual interaction. In the 3 years since she'd taken over operations at Coastal Shipyard, she'd maintained a reputation for surgical efficiency and emotional unavailability that made grown men check their work twice and pray they never found themselves alone in a room with her piercing green eyes. She was beautiful in the way that expensive sculptures were beautiful, perfectly formed, untouchable and somehow dangerous to look at too closely. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp planes of her face, and she wore tailored suits like armor, each outfit probably costing more than Aaron made in a month. She was everything Aaron Walsh was not: educated, wealthy, refined, and she made sure everyone around her understood the distance between her world and theirs. But something about that light, about the unusual silence from an office that typically buzzed with phone calls and meetings, made Aaron's protective instincts override his social anxiety. He knocked softly, then harder when no response came. "Ms. Flynn, everything okay in there?" Still nothing. Aaron tried the handle, surprised to find it unlocked. The door swung open to reveal a scene that would be burned into his memory forever. Margaret Flynn sat slumped over her massive mahogany desk, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled in ways that seemed impossible. Her auburn hair had escaped its strict confines, falling in waves around a face that looked younger, more vulnerable than Aaron had ever seen it. An empty bottle of whiskey sat next to her computer, and scattered across the desk were what looked like financial documents covered in red ink, the kind of red ink that meant serious trouble. But it was her hands that made Aaron's breath catch. Both palms were stained with blue paint, not the industrial paint used in the shipyard, but something richer, more vibrant. The color had dried under her fingernails and streaked up her wrists like evidence of a crime she couldn't remember committing. "Ms. Flynn." Aaron stepped into the office, his voice gentler now. "Margaret." She stirred at the sound of her first name, lifting her head with the careful precision of someone trying very hard not to fall over. When her eyes found his, Aaron felt something shift in his chest. Gone was the sharp authority he'd grown accustomed to, replaced by something raw and frightened and utterly human. "Aaron," her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it, slurred but not unpleasant. "What are you doing here?" Making my rounds. Storm knocked out power in Building C, wanted to make sure everything was secure before I headed home. Erin moved closer, noting the way she gripped the edge of her desk, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Are you all right? You look like I've been hit by a truck. Margaret attempted a laugh, but it came out hollow and brittle. That's probably accurate. Erin's eyes swept the office, taking in details that painted a picture of a woman on the edge. The usually pristine space was chaos, papers scattered across every surface, an overturned coffee cup staining important-looking contracts, and in the corner a canvas bag that seemed to be leaking blue paint onto the expensive carpet. Ms. Flynn, I think maybe you should let me call someone. Your husband or no husband, Margaret said quickly, then seemed to realize how much that admission revealed. No one to call, just me and my magnificent self-destruction. She tried to stand swayed dangerously and would have fallen if Erin hadn't lunged forward to catch her. The contact sent electricity through both of them, her soft curves against his solid frame, the scent of expensive perfume mixed with whiskey, and something else, something creative and wild, that didn't match the woman he thought he knew. Easy there, Erin said, his voice rougher than he intended. Let me help you. Margaret looked up at him, and for a moment the distance between boss and employee evaporated entirely. She was just a woman, and he was just a man, and the storm outside seemed to be raging inside both of them. You don't understand, she whispered, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. I've ruined everything. The company, my life, everything I've worked for. And tonight, she gestured helplessly at her paint-stained hands. Tonight I did something I swore I'd never do again. What did you do? I remembered who I used to be. Before Erin could ask what that meant, Margaret's knees buckled completely. He caught her again, this time lifting her into his arms with the easy strength of a man who'd spent his life doing physical labor. She felt lighter than he'd expected, more fragile, as if the armor she wore every day had been weighing her down. I'm taking you home, he said firmly. Can't go home, Margaret mumbled against his shoulder. Too many ghosts there. Too many memories. Erin hesitated, his mind racing through options. He could call a cab, but Margaret was in no condition to be left alone. He could try to find contact information for family or friends, but something about her earlier words suggested those options didn't exist. That left one alternative that his protective instincts were already embracing, despite every rational argument against it. Then you're coming home with me, he said. Margaret's head lifted from his shoulder, her eyes trying to focus on his face. That's inappropriate. You work for me. I work for the company. There are rules. Rules don't apply during storms, Erin said, already moving toward the door. And right now you need somewhere safe to sleep this off. My place is closer than any hotel, and I've got a couch that's seen worse nights than this. As he carried her through the rain toward his pickup truck, Erin couldn't help but notice how perfectly she fit in his arms, how right it felt to be protecting her instead of taking orders from her. Margaret Flynn, the Iron Lady, who'd never shown a moment of weakness, was clinging to his shirt like he was the only solid thing in a world gone sideways. The drive to Erin's trailer took 20 minutes through rain that hammered his windshield like machine gun fire. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling things that made no sense, references to gallery openings, and art critics' mentions of a sister named Sarah, and repeated apologies for something she called the betrayal. Erin lived in a modest double-wide on 5 acres outside town, a place he'd bought for himself and his 8-year-old son, Ethan, after his ex-wife had decided that single motherhood was too much responsibility. It wasn't much, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a living room that served double duty as Ethan's homework space, but it was theirs, paid for with honest work and careful budgeting. This is it, Aaron said as he pulled into his gravel driveway. Not exactly executive housing, but it's warm and dry. Margaret stirred, looking out at the modest home with something that might have been longing. It looks peaceful. It is. Aaron killed the engine and came around to help her out of the truck. Most of the time. The babysitter, Mrs. Chen from down the road, met them at the door with raised eyebrows and the kind of knowing look that small-town residents perfected over decades of minding everyone else's business. "Storm get you folks?" she asked, taking in Margaret's disheveled appearance and the way Aaron was supporting her weight. "Something like that," Aaron replied. "How's Ethan?" "Sleeping like an angel. Finished his homework and went down without a fuss." Mrs. Chen gathered her purse and jacket, clearly eager to escape before the storm got worse. "You need anything else, you just holler." After the babysitter left, Aaron found himself alone with his unconscious boss in a living room that suddenly felt too small and too intimate. Margaret had passed out again in his arms, her breath warm against his neck, her paint-stained hands clutching his shirt like anchors. He carried her to the couch, settling her as gently as possible before covering her with the quilt his grandmother had made years ago. In sleep with her defenses down and her face relaxed, Margaret Flynn looked younger, more vulnerable. The sharp edges that made her so intimidating were softened by exhaustion, and whatever demons had driven her to drink herself unconscious in her office. Aaron was turning to leave when her voice stopped him. "Don't go," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "Please, I can't be alone with the dreams tonight." "What dreams?" "Fire. There's always fire, and I can never save her." A tear slipped down Margaret's cheek. "My sister. I couldn't save my sister." Aaron knelt beside the couch, his hand hovering uncertainly over her shoulder. "Margaret, you're safe now. Whatever happened, you're safe." Her eyes opened, then fixing on his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Am I? Or am I just hiding again?" "Hiding from what?" "From everything I used to be. Everything I lost." Her paint-stained hand reached out, fingers grazing his cheek with surprising gentleness. "Aaron, can I tell you a secret?" "I'm listening." "I used to create beautiful things. Before I became this cold, calculating machine, I used to make art that made people cry. Real tears, not the fake ones they shed at corporate presentations." Her voice was getting drowsier, but her words remained clear. "And tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I picked up a brush again." Aaron's mind raced, trying to reconcile this confession with the woman he thought he knew. What kind of art? The kind that tells the truth. The kind that doesn't hide behind spreadsheets and profit margins. Margaret's eyes drifted closed again. The kind that reminds you what it feels like to be human. She was asleep before Aaron could respond, leaving him kneeling beside his couch, with more questions than answers. He studied her face in the lamplight, noting details he'd never had the chance to observe, before the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her lips curved even in sleep, the paint stain on her temple that suggested she'd touched her face while working on whatever project had driven her to drink. This wasn't the Margaret Flynn he knew. This wasn't the Ice Queen who'd laid off 30 workers without blinking, who'd restructured departments with surgical precision, who'd never shown even a hint of the passionate artist she claimed to have been. This was someone else entirely, someone broken and beautiful, and infinitely more complicated than the corporate façade she wore like armor. Aaron was still processing this revelation when he heard small footsteps in the hallway. Ethan appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes and wearing the dinosaur pajamas that were his current favorites. "Dad." I heard voices. "Is everything okay?" Aaron turned to shield his son's view of their unconscious guest, his mind scrambling for an age-appropriate explanation. "Everything's fine, buddy. Just a friend who needed somewhere to stay during the storm." Ethan's eyes, so much like his own, took in the scene with the kind of perceptive intelligence that sometimes made Aaron forget his son was only 8 years old. "Is that the lady from your work, the one you say is really smart but kind of scary?" "She's not scary right now," Aaron said gently. "Right now she's just someone who needs help. Like when I had the flu and you took care of me. Something like that." Ethan nodded with the easy acceptance of childhood, but his next words caught Aaron off guard. "She looks sad, Dad. Even when she's sleeping, she looks really sad." Aaron followed his son's gaze back to Margaret, seeing her through Ethan's uncomplicated perspective. The boy was right. There was something deeply melancholy about her relaxed features, as if grief had become so much a part of her that it showed even in unconsciousness. "Yeah, buddy. I think she is sad. Maybe when she wakes up, we can make her pancakes. Pancakes always make me feel better when I'm sad." Aaron smiled, his heart swelling with pride at his son's instinctive kindness. "That's a good idea. Now back to bed, you've got school tomorrow." After tucking Ethan in and listening to his prayers, which now included "the sad lady on our couch," Aaron returned to the living room to find Margaret stirring restlessly. She was mumbling in her sleep, her hands moving as if she were painting invisible pictures in the air. "Sarah, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have been there. Should have protected you." Aaron settled into his recliner, knowing he wouldn't be getting much sleep tonight. Something about Margaret Flynn's vulnerability called to every protective instinct he possessed, and the glimpses she'd given him of her hidden life only made her more intriguing. Who was Sarah? What had happened to drive Margaret from art to corporate management? And what was the significance of that blue paint that stained her hands like evidence of a secret life? As the storm raged outside and his unexpected guest fought invisible battles in her sleep, Aaron found himself watching over Margaret Flynn and wondering if this strange night might change both their lives forever. He didn't know yet that he was right, or that the woman sleeping on his couch was about to turn his carefully constructed world upside down in ways he couldn't imagine. The last thing Aaron remembered before exhaustion finally claimed him was the sound of Margaret's voice, soft and broken in the darkness. "I used to be someone else, someone worth loving." By morning, that confession would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Aaron thought he knew about love, family, and the price of keeping secrets. But for now, there was only the storm, the silence, and two people who had no idea their lives were about to become impossibly beautifully intertwined. The next morning arrived with the kind of brittle clarity that only follows storms, both literal and emotional. Elena woke on her living room floor, the empty wine bottle still clutched in her fingers, like a lifeline she'd forgotten to release. Sunlight streamed through windows she hadn't cleaned in weeks, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories she couldn't quite catch. The leather folder lay beside her, its contents scattered across the hardwood contracts, bank statements, and that devastating confession letter written in James's careful script. She'd read it 3 times before exhaustion claimed her, each word carving deeper into the fragile foundation of everything she thought she knew about her life since David's death. Elena pushed herself upright, her body protesting against the hardwood's unforgiving embrace. The house felt different in daylight, not emptier exactly, but expectant, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She gathered the papers with trembling hands, trying to make sense of numbers that seemed too large, too impossible. Mortgage payments, utility bills, the gallery's lease, all bearing the discreet stamp of Chen Industries' financial department. How long? She whispered to the empty room, her voice hoarse from last night's tears. How long have I been living a lie? The knock came at 10:30, soft but insistent. Elena knew, without looking, that it would be James, and something inside her chest twisted part anticipation, part dread. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and winced. Her dark hair hung in tangles around a face marked by mascara tracks and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. But there was something else there, too. Something she hadn't seen in months' fire. She opened the door to find James standing on her porch, looking as wrecked as she felt. His usually immaculate appearance had cracked shirt-wrinkled tie, absent dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. In his hands, he carried a paper bag that smelled like fresh coffee and her favorite blueberry scones from Millfield's bakery. You remembered, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. I remember everything about you, Elena. His voice carried the weight of sleepless hours. Can I come in? She stepped aside, acutely aware of the space between them as he passed. The house seemed to shrink with his presence, every room suddenly too small to contain the magnitude of what lay unspoken between them. He set the bag on her kitchen counter with the careful precision of a man afraid his hands might shake. You hate me, he said, not quite a question. Elena poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, her movements deliberate and controlled. I should hate you. I want to hate you. She turned to face him, and the pain in his dark eyes nearly undid her resolve. But I can't figure out if what I'm angry about is the lying or the fact that you were right to do it. James's shoulders sagged, as if her words had physically struck him. Elena, I never meant what? The fire in her chest flared higher. Never meant to make me feel like a charity case, never meant to strip away every ounce of dignity I had left, or never meant to fall in love with your dead friend's wife. The last words hung between them like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. James's face went white, but he didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it because the truth was written in every line of his body, every careful breath he took. David knew, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The last time I saw him in the hospital, he knew. Elena's coffee mug slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor in a spray of ceramic and dark liquid. What did you just say? James knelt automatically, gathering the broken pieces, with hands that trembled despite his efforts to steady them. He called me to his room that last night. You'd gone home to shower, to change clothes. He was so weak, but his mind was still sharp as a scalpel. He looked up at her from the floor, surrounded by fragments. He said he'd been watching me watch you for months. Said he'd seen the way I looked at you, when I thought no one was paying attention. Stop! Elena's voice cracked like ice under pressure. Just stop talking. But James couldn't stop, not now that the dam had broken. He made me promise Elena, made me swear on his deathbed that I would take care of you. Not just financially, he knew I had the resources for that, but really take care of you. Love you the way you deserve to be loved, he said. James's voice broke entirely. He said you were too good for this world, too pure for the kind of grief that was coming for you. He begged me to make sure that you never had to face it alone. Elena sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The room spun around her in sickening circles, reality reshaping itself with each of James's words. He asked you to love me. He asked me to be worthy of loving you. James abandoned the broken mug, rising to his feet, but keeping his distance. There's a difference. Is there? Elena's laugh held no humor. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been following orders, playing the long game, waiting for the grieving widow to be desperate enough or lonely enough, broken enough to fall for your carefully orchestrated kindness. The accusation hit its mark. James flinched as if she'd slapped him, color draining from his face. You think this has been an act? You think I've been pretending? I don't know what to think. Elena's voice rose to a near shout. You've been paying my bills for 8 months, James. 8 months of lies, of me thinking I was somehow managing to survive on my own, that I had some shred of independence left. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? What it feels like to discover that every moment of pride, every small victory, every night I went to bed thinking I was strong enough to rebuild my life, all of it was an illusion you created. James's composure finally cracked completely. You want to know what this feels like? Fine. It feels like watching the woman you love disappear a little more each day and being powerless to stop it. It feels like standing in your driveway at 3 a.m. because you couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop worrying about whether you'd eaten dinner or if you were drinking yourself to death in that empty house. It feels like loving someone so much that you'd rather have them hate you for helping than lose them to grief. I never asked for your help. No, you didn't. You never ask for anything, Elena. You'd rather starve than admit you need someone. You'd rather lose everything than accept that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to carry the weight of the world alone. His voice gentled, becoming almost pleading. I've watched you for 2 years, first as David's friend, then as... God, I don't even know what I am to you now. But I've seen you give everything to everyone around you and never ask for anything in return. You think that makes you strong, but sometimes it just makes you unreachable. Elena stood abruptly, needing movement, needing space. She paced to the window that overlooked her backyard. The garden James had tended, the fence he'd repaired, the small stone path he'd laid, without ever asking permission or expecting thanks. Everything she'd thought was her own small rebellion against despair had his fingerprints all over it. The gallery, she said, her back still turned to him. How long before you would have bought that too, Elena? How long, James? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. When he finally answered, his voice was barely audible. The foreclosure notice was scheduled for next week. I'd already prepared the paperwork. She turned then, and the look on her face made him take an involuntary step backward. Get out. Elena, please. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. Take your money, your guilt, your deathbed promises, and get out. Her voice was steel wrapped in ice. I'll pay back every penny, even if it takes me the rest of my life. James stood frozen, his face a mask of devastation. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that I've been living in a dollhouse you built, playing at independence while you pulled all the strings. I understand that every conversation we've had, every moment of connection, every time I thought maybe I was ready to feel something again, it was all built on a foundation of lies and pity. It wasn't pity, James said desperately. Elena, what I feel for you has nothing to do with David, nothing to do with promises or guilt. It's over. The words came out flat, final. Whatever this was, whatever you thought it might become, it's over. James looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes memorizing her face as if he might never see it again. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the front door. Elena heard his footsteps on the hardwood, heard the soft click of the door closing behind him, and then she was alone with the wreckage of everything she'd thought she knew about her life. She sank to the kitchen floor among the broken pieces of her coffee mug, her body finally giving in to the grief that had been building since the moment she'd opened that leather folder. But these tears weren't just for David anymore. They were for James, for the trust she'd lost for the future she'd allowed herself to imagine for exactly one perfect, impossible night. The house settled around her in its familiar emptiness, but now even the silence felt different. It felt final. 3 days passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Elena threw herself into the gallery with desperate intensity, cataloging pieces, updating inventory, calling artists to discuss upcoming exhibitions. She pretended not to notice when the morning coffee delivery stopped arriving, when her garden began to show signs of neglect, when her phone remained stubbornly silent. She was reviewing contracts at her desk when the call came. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, utterly without warmth. "Ms. Santos, this is Margaret Chen from Chen Industries. I'm calling regarding the outstanding debt on your property." Elena's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, who?" "Margaret Chen. I'm Mr. Chen's mother, and as of this morning, I've assumed control of all his charitable endeavors." The pause was deliberate cutting. "I understand there's been some confusion about the terms of assistance provided to you. I'm calling to clarify that all financial support will be terminated immediately and will be expecting full repayment of the outstanding balance within 30 days. 30 days? Elena's voice came out as a whisper. "That's quite generous, actually. The total amount comes to just over $400,000, including accrued interest." Margaret's tone suggested she was reading from a prepared script. "Naturally, if you're unable to meet this obligation, we'll be forced to pursue legal remedies." Elena gripped the phone so tightly, her knuckles went white. Can I speak to James? Mr. Chen is no longer handling personal matters. All future communications regarding this debt will go through our legal department." A pause. "I trust this clarifies the situation." The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her phone in numb disbelief. $400,000. 30 days. The numbers swirled in her head like a death sentence, each digit another nail in the coffin of everything she'd tried to build since David's death. She was still sitting in stunned silence when her assistant knocked on the office door. "Elena, there's someone here to see you." Elena looked up to find a man in an expensive suit standing in her doorway, his smile as sharp as his perfectly pressed lapels. He extended a business card with practiced ease. "Ms. Santos, Richard Hawthorne, Hawthorne and Associates. I represent Chen Industries in matters of debt collection." The business card felt like lead in Elena's trembling fingers. "I just spoke to Margaret Chen this morning. I said I understood the terms." Of course. I'm just here to ensure there are no misunderstandings." Hawthorne settled into the chair across from her desk, without invitation, his movements predatory in their precision. $400,000 is quite a substantial sum. I imagine it would be difficult for someone in your circumstances to manage such an obligation. "What are you suggesting?" Hawthorne's smile widened. "There are alternatives, naturally. Your gallery, for instance, represents a significant asset. The building, the inventory, your client list properly valued, it might cover a substantial portion of the debt." Elena felt the walls of her office closing in around her. "You want me to sell the gallery?" "I want you to be realistic about your options, Ms. Santos. Chen Industries has been extraordinarily patient, but patience has its limits." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Mrs. Chen was quite displeased when she learned about her son's unauthorized generosity. She's not inclined toward sentiment." "And James," Elena forced herself to ask, "what does he say about this?" "Mr. Chen has been relieved of his decision-making authority in this matter. Family business, you understand." Hawthorne stood smoothing his jacket. You have 28 days now, Ms. Santos. I'd suggest you use them wisely. After he left, Elena sat alone in her office as the afternoon light faded to evening. The gallery around her, her sanctuary, her life's work, the one thing that had remained truly hers, suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. She walked through the familiar rooms, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and tried to imagine them empty, stripped of everything she'd built. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Meet me at Riverside Park, East Bench by the fountain. Come alone. Please. Elena stared at the message for a long time before grabbing her keys. She shouldn't go. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was exactly the kind of mistake that had gotten her into this mess in the first place. But her heart, her treacherous, foolish heart, was already carrying her toward the door. The park was nearly empty in the gathering dusk, long shadows stretching across grass that needed cutting. Elena found James sitting on the bench. He'd specified, his shoulders hunched against a cold wind that carried the scent of rain. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and the relief in his eyes was so profound, it nearly broke her resolve. "You came," he said simply. "I shouldn't have." Elena remained standing, keeping distance between them like a shield. "Your mother called today, and her lawyer." James's face went ashen. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I never wanted $400,000, James. 30 days. Her voice was steady, but he could see the tremor in her hands. "Did you know? When you were playing Savior, did you know this was how it would end?" "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "I swear to you I had no idea she would do this. I never meant for you to get caught in the middle of our family politics." "Family politics?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "Is that what this is? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like punishment. Like your mother found out about your little charity case and decided to teach us both a lesson." James stood, and Elena automatically took a step back. The hurt that flashed across his face was almost too much to bear. "You're not a charity case," he said quietly. "You were never that." "Then what am I, James? What am I to you really? Because I can't figure out where the lies end, and whatever this is begins." James was quiet for so long that Elena began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "You're the reason I started believing in second chances. You're the woman who makes coffee taste better, who turns grocery shopping into an adventure, who looks at broken things and sees possibility instead of damage." He took a careful step closer. "You're the first person who ever made me want to be worthy of something instead of just entitled to it." Elena felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. "Pretty words, but they don't change the facts. Your mother owns me now. In 28 days, she'll own everything I have left." "No, she won't." James's voice carried a note of steel Elena had never heard before. "I won't let that happen." "How are you going to stop it?" "According to your family's lawyer, you don't have any authority anymore." James's smile was sharp, dangerous. "Richard Hawthorne is an excellent lawyer, but he's not privy to all the details of Chen Industries' corporate structure." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "My father wasn't just a businessman, Elena. He was a strategist. And he never trusted anyone completely, not even my mother." Elena stared at the envelope. "What is that?" "Insurance. The kind my father specialized in." James held it out to her. "Controlling interest in Chen Industries doesn't belong to my mother. It belongs to me. It always has. She just didn't know it because I never saw a reason to exercise that control. Until now." Elena took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were legal documents that made her head spin: corporate bylaws, trust agreements, stock transfers. But even with her limited understanding of business law, one thing was crystal clear: James Chen didn't just work for Chen Industries. He owned it. "You're the majority shareholder," she whispered. 68%. My father set it up that way before he died, but he made me promise never to use it, unless I absolutely had to. He believed in earning respect, not demanding it. James's voice gentled. "But some things are worth breaking promises for." Elena looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd opened that leather folder, she saw something in his eyes besides guilt and desperation. She saw resolve. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your debt to Chen Industries has just been forgiven. I'm saying that Richard Hawthorne is about to get a very unpleasant phone call, and I'm saying that my mother is going to learn that there are consequences for threatening the people I love." The last word hung between them, like a bridge Elena was afraid to cross. Love. He'd said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, as if it were just another piece of evidence in his case. "James," she began, but he held up a hand. "I know you don't trust me. I know I've given you every reason to hate me. But Elena, I need you to understand something." He took another step closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "Everything I did, the bills, the mortgage, the garden, I did because I couldn't bear to watch you disappear. Not because David asked me to, not because I felt guilty, but because losing you would have killed me." Elena felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "How do I know this isn't just another manipulation, another way to control the situation?" "Because I'm giving you a choice," James said simply. "The debt is gone either way. You're free either way. You can tell me to leave, to never contact you again, and I'll honor that. You'll never see me again, never have to wonder about my motives or my feelings. Your independence, your pride, it's all yours. And if I don't choose that—" James's smile was soft, tentative, full of a hope he was afraid to voice. "Then maybe we could start over. Really start over with no secrets, no hidden agendas, no debts between us. Just two people who've been through hell and somehow found each other on the other side." Elena stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything rational in her screamed to walk away, to take his offer of freedom and run as far as she could. But standing there in the gathering darkness, looking into the eyes of the man who'd held her together when she was falling apart, she realized that sometimes the rational choice and the right choice weren't the same thing. "I'll need time," she said finally. "Time to think, time to figure out who I am when I'm not drowning in grief or anger or debt." James nodded, and the relief in his expression was profound. "However much time you need. And I'll need honesty. Complete honesty about everything. No more secrets, no more protection, no more decisions made for my own good." "Done." Elena took a shaky breath. "And I'll need you to understand that I might still decide to walk away. That loving someone isn't always enough to overcome the damage that's been done." "I understand," James said quietly. "But Elena, I'll be here either way. Whether you choose me or choose to leave, I'll be here. Because that's what love is: not needing someone to love you back, but choosing to love them anyway." As Elena walked back to her car, the manila envelope clutched in her hands like a lifeline, she realized that for the first time in 8 months, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She wasn't sure what it would bring, wasn't sure what choice she would ultimately make, but she wasn't afraid. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. The days that followed felt suspended in amber, each moment crystalline and strange. Elena moved through her gallery, like a woman learning to walk again, every step deliberate, every breath conscious. The weight of the manila envelope now locked in her office safe seemed to change the very air around her, making everything lighter, yet somehow more precious. She was cataloging a new shipment of sculptures when her phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Margaret Chen. Ms. Santos. The voice was arctic. I understand you've been in contact with my son. Elena set down her clipboard with careful precision. Mrs. Chen, how can I help you? You can start by being realistic about your situation. James may think he's protecting you, but he's only delaying the inevitable. Margaret's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Did he show you those dusty old papers? Did he make you feel special, chosen? I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Men like my son, they collect broken things. Wounded birds. It makes them feel necessary. The pause was calculated, surgical. You're not the first, Ms. Santos. There was a teacher in Portland, a nurse in Seattle. Both convinced they were different. Both certain they'd found true love. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. You're lying. Am I? Ask him about Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the name. Ask him about the apartment he bought her, the medical school tuition he paid. Ask him what happened when she got too comfortable, too dependent. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. Ask him what happens when the novelty wears off. The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her reflection in the gallery's front window. Outside afternoon, shoppers wandered past with their easy smiles and uncomplicated lives, and she envied them with an intensity that surprised her. When had simple happiness become such a foreign concept? Her hands shook as she dialed James's number. He answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting. Elena, tell me about Sarah Chen. The silence stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. When James finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Where did you hear that name? Your mother called. She said. Elena's voice cracked. She said I wasn't the first broken bird you'd collected. Jesus. James's exhale was audible through the phone. Elena, can you meet me somewhere? This isn't a conversation for phones. Just tell me if it's true. Did you pay for someone else's life before me? It's complicated. That's not an answer. James was quiet for another long moment. Yes, but not the way my mother made it sound. Never the way she made it sound. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the world tilt sideways. I'll be at the gallery until 6. If you want to explain, you know where to find me. She hung up before he could respond, then spent the next 2 hours in a state of suspended animation, half hoping he wouldn't come, half terrified that he wouldn't. When the bell above her door chimed at 5:30, she looked up to find James standing in her entrance like a man facing execution. You came, she said, echoing his words from the park. I'll always come when you call. He stepped inside and she noticed he was carrying a worn leather portfolio. Even when I know you're going to hate what I have to say. Elena gestured to the small seating area she'd created near the back of the gallery, 2 chairs and a low table where she sometimes had coffee with clients. It seemed absurdly formal for what felt like a trial, but she needed the distance, needed something solid between them. Tell me about Sarah, she said once they were seated. James opened the portfolio and pulled out a photograph. The woman looking back at Elena was younger, maybe 25, with kind eyes, and the sort of wholesome beauty that belonged in coffee commercials. She was wearing scrubs and smiling at whoever held the camera with unguarded affection. I met her 3 years ago at a medical conference in Portland. She was working as a nurse, putting herself through medical school 1 class at a time. James's voice was carefully controlled. Her father had died when she was 16. Cancer. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Elena studied the photograph, looking for similarities between herself and this stranger. And you decided to rescue her. I decided to help her. There's a difference. James pulled out another photo, Sarah in a graduation cap and gown, beaming beside James in an expensive suit. She was brilliant, Elena. Absolutely brilliant. But the system was designed to keep people like her out. No connections, no family money, no safety net. So you became her safety net. I paid for her last 2 years of school, yes. Helped her with living expenses, bought her a reliable car so she didn't have to take 3 buses to get to clinical rotations. James's fingers traced the edge of the photograph. She graduated summa cum laude, got into one of the best residency programs in the country. Elena felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. And then she met someone. Another resident. Someone her own age, someone who understood her world in ways I never could. James's smile was sad, but genuine. Someone who loved her for who she was becoming, not who I wanted her to be. You lost her. I let her go. James corrected gently. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You want them to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. Elena stared at the photograph spread across the small table. Your mother said there were others. There were. A teacher whose school was closing who would have lost her job and her pension. A single father whose son needed surgery they couldn't afford. James gathered the photos with careful hands. My mother sees charity where I see justice. She sees weakness where I see strength. And what do you see when you look at me? James met her eyes directly. I see the woman who makes me want to be better than I am. I see someone who's been through hell and came out fighting. I see... He paused, struggling with words. I see home, Elena. For the first time in my life, I see home. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they could cross. Elena felt tears threatening and forced them back, needing clarity more than comfort. How do I know this isn't just another pattern, another broken bird for your collection? Because you're not broken. James leaned forward, his eyes intense. Grieving, yes. Hurt, absolutely. But not broken. You've built something beautiful here, Elena. You've created art and community and purpose out of your pain. That's not the work of a broken person. Elena looked around her gallery, the carefully curated pieces, the warm lighting, the small touches that made the space feel welcoming rather than intimidating. She'd done that. Despite everything, despite the debt and the deception, she'd built something that mattered. Your mother won't give up, she said finally. She'll find other ways to come after me after us. Let me worry about my mother. James's voice carried that same note of steel she'd heard in the park. I've spent my whole life avoiding conflict with her, trying to be the son she wanted instead of the man I am. But Elena, I'm done pretending that keeping peace with her is more important than protecting the people I love. She'll disown you. Good. Maybe it's time I learned to stand on my own. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she'd carried for so long, she'd forgotten it was there. I'm scared, James. I'm scared of trusting you and being wrong. I'm scared of not trusting you and losing something real. I'm scared too. James reached across the table, his fingers barely brushing hers. I'm scared that I've ruined any chance we might have had. I'm scared that my need to protect you has hurt you worse than anything I was trying to protect you from. Maybe we can be scared together, Elena said softly. Maybe that's better than being brave alone. James's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I'd like that. Being scared together, I mean. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of confession and forgiveness settling around them like a blanket. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the gallery walls in shades of gold and amber that made everything look softer, more forgiving. "I want to show you something," Elena said suddenly. She stood and led him to a corner of the gallery she'd been working on for weeks, a small alcove where she'd been experimenting with her own pieces for the first time since David's death. The paintings were raw, emotional, full of dark blues and violent reds that spoke of grief and rage and slowly healing wounds. But threaded through the darkness were streaks of gold, hints of light that suggested dawn might be possible after all. "You painted these?" James's voice held wonder. "I started them the night after our fight. I was so angry, so hurt, and I needed somewhere to put all of it." Elena touched the edge of one canvas, her fingers coming away slightly stained with gold paint. But then something strange happened. The more I painted the darkness, the more I found myself adding light. James studied the paintings with the intensity of someone seeing a master's work for the first time. "They're extraordinary, Elena. They're you. They're us," she corrected. "The darkness and the light, the hurt and the healing. They're what happens when two damaged people try to figure out how to love each other without destroying everything in the process." James turned to look at her, and Elena saw tears in his eyes. "Are we going to figure it out? How to love each other, I mean." "I don't know," Elena said honestly. "But I know I want to try. Really try this time. With no secrets, no protection, no safety nets. Just us figuring it out as we go." "That sounds terrifying." "It sounds perfect." James moved closer, close enough that Elena could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with something that was purely him. "Can I kiss you? Really kiss you this time? Not because we're both drunk on wine and grief, but because I love you and you might possibly love me back." Elena's answer was to reach up and touch his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never noticed before. "I might possibly love you back," she whispered. "But James, this time if we do this, we do it right. We do it honest." "Honest," he agreed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sure, and full of promises they were both finally ready to make. The kiss tasted like new beginnings, and old sorrows like hope wrapped in caution, and love brave enough to try again. When they finally broke apart, Elena felt like she was seeing James clearly for the first time. Not as David's friend, not as her mysterious savior, not as the enemy who'd betrayed her trust, but as simply Soms. Complicated, flawed, brave, terrifying James. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we go slow," James said, his forehead resting against hers. "Now we learn each other all over again, but properly this time. No lies, no shortcuts, no skipping the hard parts." "I like the hard parts," Elena said, surprised by her own honesty. "They're usually where the interesting stuff happens." James laughed, the sound rich and genuine and full of relief. "In that case, Ms. Santos, I think we're going to have a very interesting time." They were interrupted by the sharp sound of Elena's phone buzzing against the table. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Unknown number." "Don't answer it," James said quickly. "It's probably my mother. She has a dozen different phones, all untraceable." But Elena was already sliding her finger across the screen. "Elena Santos." "Ms. Santos, this is Detective Morrison with the Portland Police Department. I'm calling about an incident involving James Chen." Elena's blood went cold. "What kind of incident?" There was a break-in at his Portland residence early this morning. Mr. Chen was injured in the altercation. He's been asking for you. The phone slipped from Elena's nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. James caught it before she could react, his face going pale as he listened to the detective's words. "I'm sorry, Detective Morrison, but I think there's been some mistake. James Chen is standing right here with me." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Sir, I'm going to need you to repeat that. You said James Chen is with you right now." "Yes, he's been here for the past hour. We've been together since 5:30. "Sir, that's impossible. James Chen was found unconscious in his Portland home at approximately 6 this morning. He's been in surgery for the past 4 hours. Elena felt the world tilt sideways, reality reshaping itself in ways that made no sense. James, the man who just kissed her with such tender honesty, was staring at the phone with an expression of absolute confusion. "Detective," James said carefully, "I think you need to know that James Chen is not in Portland. James Chen is in Millfield, Oregon, has been all day, and has definitely not been the victim of any crime. And I am James Chen." The detective's pause was pregnant with implications Elena wasn't ready to consider. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come down to the station. Both of you. There are some questions that need answering." As Elena watched James end the call, she realized that their story was far from over. In fact, it was possible that everything they thought they knew about James, about his past, about his identity, was about to be called into question. "James," she said quietly, "who the hell are you really?" The look of genuine confusion on his face was almost worse than any lie could have been, because Elena was beginning to suspect that James Chen, the man she was falling in love with, the man who'd just promised her complete honesty, might not know the answer to that question himself. "I don't know," he whispered, and Elena realized that their real journey was just beginning. The drive to the police station passed in a blur of streetlights and unanswered questions. Elena gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white, while James sat in the passenger seat staring at his own hands, as if they belonged to a stranger. The silence between them was different now, not comfortable, not charged with possibility, but heavy with the weight of everything they didn't understand. "There has to be an explanation," Elena said for the third time, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Identity theft, maybe, or someone using your name." "Using my name and living in my house," James replied hollowly. The detective said Portland residence. "Elena, I have a house in Portland. I've had it for 6 years." She pulled into the police station parking lot, the harsh fluorescent lights making everything look stark and unforgiving. "Then we'll figure it out. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." James looked at her, and the gratitude in his eyes was so profound it made her chest ache. "You believe me. Even with all of this insanity, you believe me." "I believe you don't know what's happening," Elena said carefully. "I believe you're as confused as I am. Beyond that..." She turned off the engine and faced him fully. "James, I need you to think. Really think. Is there anything at all that you haven't told me? Any family history? Any medical issues? Any gaps in your memory?" James was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There was an accident," he said finally. "When I was 19. A car accident. I was in a coma for 2 weeks." Elena's heart stopped. "What kind of accident?" "Head trauma. My father said I was lucky to survive, that there might be some memory issues, but nothing severe." James pressed his palms against his temples. "But Elena, that was 15 years ago. Whatever happened today, it can't be connected to that. Can't it? Elena reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. James, what if there's something about that accident, about those 2 weeks, that you don't remember? What if your family, my family, wouldn't lie about something like this? But even as he said it, James's voice lacked conviction. Would they put uns? Elena thought about Margaret Chen's cold efficiency, her surgical precision in delivering threats. Your mother called me a broken bird. She told me about other women you'd helped. She seemed to know an awful lot about your personal life for someone who claims to disapprove of your choices. She's always been controlling, but this… James shook his head. This would be insane, Elena. You're talking about some kind of conspiracy, some kind of elaborate deception that's been going on for years. I'm talking about a family with unlimited resources and a son who nearly died in an accident that left him with memory issues. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. I'm talking about a mother who clearly believes she knows what's best for everyone around her. Before James could respond, Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID made her blood run cold, Margaret Chen. Don't answer it, James said immediately. I have to. She might have answers. Elena swiped to accept the call. Mrs. Chen. Where is he? Margaret's voice was sharp with panic, all her earlier composure gone. Where is my son? He's with me. We're about to go into the police station to… No. The word came out like a gunshot. You cannot let him go in there. You cannot let him talk to them. Elena felt ice forming in her veins. Why not? Because you don't understand what you're dealing with. Because there are things about James, about our family, that are more complicated than you could possibly imagine. Then explain them to me. Margaret's laugh was brittle, desperate. Over the phone with police listening to every word, Ms. Santos, if you care about my son at all, you will bring him to the Chen estate immediately. Before this goes any further, before people get hurt who don't deserve to be hurt. People like the man in Portland who's been beaten half to death. That's not my son, Margaret said quietly, and that's exactly the problem. The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her phone in stunned silence. Beside her, James had gone pale. What did she mean, that's not her son? Elena asked. I don't know. James's voice was barely a whisper. But Elena, I think we need to make a choice. We can go into that police station and hope they have answers, or we can go to your mother and demand the truth. It might not be safe. If she's been lying about something this big, if there's something I don't remember. Elena looked at the police station's bright windows, then at the man beside her who had somehow become the center of her world despite everything. James, do you trust me? With my life? Then we go to your mother. But we go together and we don't leave until we have the whole truth. Elena started the engine, her hands steadier now that she'd made a decision. Because I'm tired of living in a world where nothing makes sense. I'm tired of loving someone I don't fully understand. The Chen estate sat on 50 acres of manicured perfection, a monument to wealth and control that made Elena feel small and insignificant. The house itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all clean lines and soaring glass that reflected the moon like a mirror. As they pulled through the wrought iron gates, Elena noticed security cameras tracking their progress with mechanical precision. I grew up here, James said quietly. But looking at it now, it feels like a prison. Maybe it was always supposed to. Margaret Chen was waiting for them on the front steps, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Her silver hair had been pulled back hastily, and she wore a simple black dress that made her look older, more fragile than Elena had expected. Thank God, Margaret breathed as they got out of the car. I was terrified you'd gone to the police. We still might, Elena said firmly. That depends entirely on what you tell us in the next 10 minutes. Margaret's laugh was hollow. 10 minutes, if only it were that simple. She gestured toward the house. Please come inside. This conversation requires privacy. The interior of the Chen house was as intimidating as its exterior soaring ceilings. Priceless art furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. Margaret led them to a study lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the air heavy with the scent of leather and old money. Sit, Margaret said, gesturing to 2 chairs arranged in front of a massive mahogany desk. Please. I'd rather stand, James said, his voice tight with tension. Mother, what the hell is going on? Who is the man in Portland, and why does he have my name? Margaret moved to a wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Chen family, a younger James standing between his parents, his smile bright and uncomplicated. Elena realized with a start that this must have been taken before the accident, before whatever had changed everything. His name is James Chen, Margaret said, as she worked the safe's combination. He's 34 years old, born in Portland, Oregon. He's a successful businessman, philanthropist, and heir to the Chen Industries fortune. She pulled out a thick file and turned to face them. And until 15 years ago, he was my son. Elena felt the world tilt sideways. What are you saying? I'm saying that the man standing in this room, the man you've fallen in love with, is not James Chen. Margaret's voice was steady, clinical. His name is David Kim. He was 21 years old when he nearly died in a car accident that took my real son's life. James staggered backward as if he'd been physically struck. That's impossible. You're lying. Am I? Margaret opened the file, spreading photographs across the desk. Here's James at 18 before the accident. Here's David Kim in the hospital unconscious, no identification, no family looking for him. She pulled out medical records, police reports, documents that made Elena's head spin. Both boys, both dark-haired, both approximately the same height and build, both victims of the same accident that should have killed them both. Elena sank into one of the chairs, her legs no longer able to support her weight. You switched them. You let everyone think your son survived, and this David Kim died. My son was brain dead, Margaret said quietly. The machines were keeping his body alive, but James, my James, was gone. David Kim was in a coma, but the doctors said he had a chance, a real chance. So you made a choice, Elena whispered, the horror of it settling over her like a shroud. I made a mother's choice. I couldn't save my son, but I could save someone else's. I could give David Kim a life, a family, a future. And in return, Margaret's voice broke slightly. In return, I could pretend my son was still alive. James David, whoever he was, stood frozen in the center of the room, his face a mask of devastation. My memories, my childhood, my relationship with you, with Father, all of it was a lie. Not a lie. An adaptation. Margaret's voice hardened again. You had retrograde amnesia from the accident. You couldn't remember anything before you woke up. So we gave you memories, stories, photographs. We gave you a life. What about David Kim's real family? Elena asked, her voice shaking with rage. What about his real life? He was a foster child. No family. No one looking for him. He was studying art at Portland Community College on a scholarship, working nights at a diner to pay for supplies. Margaret pulled out more documents, school records, employment history, a driver's license photo of a young man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He was nobody, Elena, We made him somebody. Elena stared at the photograph, seeing traces of the man she loved in this stranger's face. You stole his identity. You stole his life. We saved his life, Margaret corrected. And we gave him opportunities he never would have had as David Kim. But the real James Chen, Elena pressed. What happened to his body? Margaret's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. We buried him as David Kim. There's a grave in Riverside Cemetery with David's name on it, but it's my son who lies there. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena watched as the man she loved, James David, whoever he was, struggled to process the enormity of what he'd learned. His entire identity, everything he thought he knew about himself, had been built on a foundation of lies and desperation. The man in Portland, Elena said finally. Who is he? That's where it gets complicated, Margaret admitted. 3 years ago, we discovered that someone was living in Portland using James Chen's identity. Credit cards, bank accounts, even a house, all in my dead son's name. You have another fake James Chen? Elena's voice rose with disbelief. We believe it's someone who discovered what we did and decided to profit from it. Someone who knows about the accident, about the switch. Margaret's hands shook as she gathered the scattered documents. We've been investigating quietly, trying to determine how much this person knows and what they want. And today someone tried to kill him or capture him. We're not sure which. Margaret looked directly at the man she'd called her son for 15 years. David, I think someone is trying to use this situation against us. Against you. David. Elena found she couldn't think of him as James anymore, finally spoke, his voice hollow and strange. Why tell us now? Why not let us go to the police, let them sort it out? Because if this goes public, if the truth comes out, it won't just destroy our family. It will destroy Chen Industries, the foundation, every good thing we've built. Margaret's voice was pleading now. And it will destroy you. David, you have no legal identity. Officially, you died 15 years ago. If the authorities discover what we did, I'll go to prison, David finished quietly. For identity theft, fraud may be accessory to whatever happened to the real James Chen's body. And Elena will be implicated as an accomplice, Margaret added, her eyes finding Elena's. Everyone you've helped, every business dealing you've had as James Chen, all of it becomes evidence of ongoing fraud. Elena felt the walls closing in around her. Everything they'd fought for, every moment of happiness they'd managed to build together, was balanced on a knife's edge of deception that had been set in motion before they'd even met. What do you want from us? Elena asked. I want you to disappear, Margaret said simply. Both of you, tonight. I've prepared new identities, clean papers, enough money to start over anywhere in the world. She pulled out 2 passports from the safe. You can be together, but you can't be James Chen and Elena Santos anymore. David took the passport with hands that trembled. The name inside read Michael Thompson. And if we refuse, then we all face the consequences of what I did 15 years ago. The foundation shuts down, the scholarship ends. The charitable work stops. Hundreds of people who depend on Chen Industries lose their jobs. Margaret's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. And the man you've become, the good you've done as James Chen, becomes meaningless. Elena looked at the passport Margaret held out to her, Jennifer Thompson, complete with a photograph she didn't remember taking. You've been planning this for a while. I've been planning for every contingency since the day I made the choice to save David's life, Margaret replied. I won't apologize for protecting my family, even a family built on necessary lies. David moved to the window, staring out at the manicured grounds where he'd supposedly grown up but had no real memory of. Elena, I need you to know, that whatever I am, whatever name I carry, how I feel about you is real. That's the only thing I'm certain of anymore." Elena stood and went to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. Through the glass, she could see her reflection standing beside a stranger who wore the face of the man she loved. "I know. And David, I need you to know that I don't care what your name is or where you came from. I care about who you are now, who you choose to be. Even if choosing to be with me means giving up everything else." Elena thought about her gallery, her life in Millfield, the identity she'd built for herself after her husband's death. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd already lost one David, and now she was being asked to give up her life for another. "Yes," she said simply. "Even then." Margaret cleared her throat delicately. "I don't mean to interrupt, but we have very little time. The police will expect you to come in for questioning soon, and if this Portland situation escalates—" "How long do we have?" David asked. "Hours, not days. I've chartered a private jet to Vancouver. From there you can go anywhere, Europe, Asia, South America. I've established accounts in your new names enough to live comfortably while you decide what kind of life you want to build." Elena felt a hysterical laugh building in her chest. "You make it sound so simple. Just walk away from everything and everyone we've ever known." "Simple, no." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "But necessary. And Elena, you wouldn't be walking away alone. You'd be walking away together." David turned from the window, his eyes finding Elena's. "It's your choice. I won't ask you to give up your life for me, not after everything you've already lost." Elena thought about her gallery, about the paintings she'd been working on, about the life she'd been rebuilding piece by piece. Then she thought about the alternative, watching David get arrested, seeing their relationship dissected in courtrooms and newspapers, losing him to a system that would never understand the impossible choices that had brought them together. "If we do this," she said finally, "if we take these new identities and disappear, can we ever come back? Not as James Chen and Elena Santos," Margaret said gently. "Those people would have to cease to exist. But as Michael and Jennifer Thompson, you could build whatever life you wanted. Start a new gallery, create new art, help new people." Margaret's voice carried a note of hope. "You could be free in ways you never imagined possible." Elena looked at the passport in her hands, at the photograph of a woman who looked like her, but carried a stranger's name. "What happens to our old lives, to the gallery, to the house David bought me? I'll handle everything. The gallery will be sold, the proceeds donated to charity in your memory. Your house will be handled similarly." Margaret's efficiency was both impressive and terrifying. To the world, Elena Santos will have suffered a breakdown following her husband's death and taken her own life. James Chen will have died in the same incident. "You'll stage our deaths," David said, his voice flat. "I'll stage your disappearance in a way that allows you to live. There's a difference." Elena felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. "I need a moment. To think, to process all of this." "Of course. But Elena, please remember, whatever choice you make has to be made soon." Elena walked to the other side of the study, needing distance from both Margaret's calculating efficiency and David's patient suffering. She found herself standing in front of a bookshelf lined with photo albums, and without thinking, she pulled one down and opened it. The photographs inside told the story of a family that had never really existed, birthday parties and holidays and graduations featuring a boy who wasn't really their son. But as she turned the pages, Elena saw something else: genuine love, real affection, moments of authentic happiness, despite the foundation of lies beneath them. "He was happy here," she said aloud, not turning around. "David was happy as your son." "Yes," Margaret said softly. I think he was. Despite everything, I think we managed to give him that. Elena closed the album and turned back to face them. David was watching her with eyes that held 15 years of borrowed memories and one night of devastating truth. Margaret stood beside her desk like a general planning a campaign, every detail mapped out, except for the human hearts that would have to live with the consequences. If we do this, Elena said, there's no going back, no changing our minds, no contact with anyone from our old lives. None, Margaret confirmed. And if we don't, then we face whatever comes together, knowing that it will likely destroy everything we've all worked to build. Elena moved back to David's side, taking his hand in hers. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but his grip was steady. What do you want to do? I want to be with you, he said simply. Everything else, the money, the company, the identity, none of it matters compared to that. Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of their impossible choice settling around them like a shroud. Then we run. We take your mother's passports, and we run, and we figure out how to build a life that's actually ours. Margaret's relief was visible, her shoulders sagging, as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. You're making the right choice. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you're giving yourselves a chance at something real. Something built on the biggest lie imaginable, Elena pointed out. Something built on love, Margaret corrected. The lie was what I did 15 years ago. What you're doing now is choosing each other, despite everything that's tried to keep you apart. As they prepared to leave the Chen estate forever, Elena found herself thinking about the paintings she'd been working on. The dark blues and violent reds shot through with unexpected gold. Perhaps those paintings had been prophetic after all, depicting not just her journey through grief, but her transformation into someone brave enough to walk away from everything familiar in pursuit of something true. Are you ready? David asked, as Margaret handed them a final envelope filled with cash and documents. Elena looked back at the house where he'd grown up as someone else's son, then forward to the car that would take them to an airport and a plane and a life that existed only in possibility. No, she said honestly, but I'm ready to try. As they drove away from the Chen estate, Elena realized that she was finally free, not from her past, which would always be part of her, but from the weight of other people's expectations about who she should be and how she should grieve and what kind of life she deserved. For the first time since David's death, her husband's death, she corrected herself, understanding now why the names had always felt so significant. She was choosing her own future. And she was choosing it with a man who might not know his own name, but who knew with absolute certainty that he loved her enough to risk everything for the chance to find out who they could become together. The private jet's engines hummed beneath them as they climbed through the darkness, leaving behind the lights of Portland and everything they'd ever known. Elena pressed her face to the small window, watching America disappear beneath a blanket of clouds, and wondered if this was what death felt like, this strange suspension between one life and another, this weightless moment when everything familiar fell away. No regrets, David asked softly from the seat beside her. He was holding their new passports, studying the photographs, as if he could memorize their new faces into being. 1,000 regrets, Elena replied honestly. But not about this choice. Never about this choice. They landed in Vancouver as the sun was rising, two strangers with borrowed names and uncertain futures. Margaret had arranged everything with her characteristic efficiency, a hotel suite overlooking the harbor, a rental car, even a preliminary apartment lease in Whistler under their new identities. But as they stood in the customs line, Elena felt the full weight of their transformation settling over her like lead. Michael Thompson, the customs officer said, examining David's passport. Purpose of your visit to Canada? Starting over, David replied without thinking. then caught himself. I mean vacation. Extended vacation. The officer's eyes sharpened slightly, but he stamped the passport and handed it back. Enjoy your stay. Outside the airport, Elena breathed Canadian air and felt like an alien on her own planet. Everything looked almost familiar, but wrong signs in both English and French, different license plates, money that felt like play currency in her hands. We need to talk, she said, as they sat in their rental car in the airport parking garage. Really talk about who we're going to be now. David turned off the engine and faced her fully. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, she could see exhaustion carved into every line of his face. You mean Michael and Jennifer Thompson? I mean us. The people we actually are underneath all these names. Elena pulled off the simple gold band she still wore on her left hand, her wedding ring from her marriage to the real David. I can't keep being a widow, and you can't keep being a dead man's ghost. David watched as she placed the ring in the car's cup holder, this small symbol of her past life gleaming between them like a question mark. What do you want us to be? I want us to be honest, completely honest for the first time since we met. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. I want to tell you that I love you, not James Chen, not some idealized version of you that I created in my head, but you. David Kim, the artist who died and came back to life as someone else. The man who chose to love me even when loving me meant losing everything. David reached across the space between them and took her trembling hands in his. And I want to tell you that I love you, not because you remind me of someone I lost, not because I feel guilty about your husband's death, but because you're the strongest, most beautiful, most infuriatingly independent woman I've ever known. Elena Santos, who would rather starve than accept help, who turns grief into art and loneliness into purpose. But Elena Santos is dead now, she whispered. According to the world, according to your mother's careful plans, Elena Santos couldn't handle her grief and took her own life. Then we mourn her, David said simply. We mourn Elena Santos and James Chen Puang and David Kim, and then we figure out who Michael and Jennifer Thompson are going to be. They drove to the hotel in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Their suite was luxurious in the way that only unlimited money could buy floor-to-ceiling windows, Egyptian cotton sheets, a balcony that overlooked the harbor, where cruise ships prepared for their journeys to Alaska. Elena stood on that balcony as the sun climbed higher, watching ordinary people live their ordinary lives, and felt the strange grief of being erased from the world. I keep thinking about my gallery, she said, when David joined her outside. About the paintings I was working on, the artists whose careers I was trying to launch. About Mrs. Henderson, who comes in every Tuesday to look at the same landscape painting because it reminds her of her late husband's favorite fishing spot. She'll find another gallery, David said gently, but not one that knows she prefers her coffee with exactly 2 sugars and cream, or that she's saving up to buy that painting for her anniversary next month. Elena's voice cracked slightly. I built something that mattered, David. Small maybe, but real. And now it's just going to disappear, like it never existed. David was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the balcony railing. In my other life, in David Kim's life, I was an artist too. Nothing famous, nothing important. I painted portraits of homeless people trying to show their dignity, their humanity. I probably would have spent my whole life unknown, struggling to pay rent, fighting for gallery space. Do you miss it? That life you never got to live. I miss the certainty of it. I knew who I was then, even if I was nobody special. David turned to look at her, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. But Elena, I can't regret losing that life if losing it brought me to you. Even if I'm not really Elena anymore, you're more Elena than you've ever been. Names are just sounds, Jennifer. Identity is what we choose to do with the time we're given. The way he said her new name made it sound like an endearment, a secret shared between lovers. Elena felt something inside her chest loosen, not the grief which would probably always be with her, but the fear. The fear that she was losing herself, that she was disappearing into someone else's story. Jennifer, she repeated, testing the syllables. Jennifer Thompson, who loves a man named Michael and is brave enough to rebuild her life from nothing. Michael Thompson, who fell in love with a widow and learned that sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to live fully for the living. They spent the rest of the day walking through Vancouver, learning the geography of their new world. They bought clothes that Jennifer Thompson might wear, simple and practical but beautiful. They opened bank accounts and applied for Canadian social insurance numbers, the mundane bureaucracy of becoming real again. With each signature, each form filled out, Elena felt their old lives receding further into memory. That evening they sat in a small restaurant in Gastown sharing pasta and wine, and the strange intimacy of two people who had nothing left to hide from each other. "What kind of life do you want?" David asked as they lingered over dessert. "Really want if we could have anything." Elena considered the question seriously. "I want to create something again. Not a gallery this time, something new. Maybe an art therapy center, a place where people who are grieving can learn to express their pain through creativity." "That sounds like something Jennifer Thompson would do. What about you? What does Michael Thompson want?" David smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him since learning the truth about his identity. "I want to paint again. Real painting, not the careful corporate art that James Chen collected. I want to get my hands dirty to create something messy and honest and mine." "We could do it together," Elena said suddenly. "The art center. You could teach painting while I handle the business side. We could help people the way we've helped each other. A partnership. A real partnership. No secrets, no hidden agendas, no one person trying to save the other." Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Just two people building something beautiful together. David brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, Jennifer Thompson." "I love you too, Michael Thompson." As they walked back to their hotel through the bustling Vancouver streets, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Excitement about the future. Not just contentment or resignation, but genuine anticipation for what was coming next. They made love that night, with a tenderness that was entirely different from their previous encounters. There was no grief driving them together, no desperate need to fill the empty spaces left by loss. This was about choice, about two people who had seen each other at their absolute worst and decided they wanted to build something together anyway. Later, as David slept beside her, Elena stood at the window, watching the harbor lights reflect on the water. She thought about the real David, her husband, and felt the familiar ache of missing him. But for the first time, that ache wasn't accompanied by guilt about moving forward. He would have wanted her to be happy. He would have wanted her to love again. "I'm sorry I have to let you go," she whispered to his memory. "But I think you'd understand." 3 months later, they were living in a small house in Whistler, surrounded by mountains that made Elena feel simultaneously insignificant and infinite. The art therapy center was still just a dream, but they'd started small weekend workshops for local residents, painting classes for teenagers, grief counseling sessions that Elena had trained for through correspondence courses. David had set up a studio in their converted garage, and his new paintings were unlike anything he'd created as James Chen. They were raw, emotional, full of the kind of truth that could only come from someone who had died and been reborn. Elena posed for some of them, not glamorous portraits, but honest studies of a woman learning to be herself again. "You're different," David said one evening, as they worked side by side, she on grant applications for their proposed center, thee on a canvas that seemed to capture the exact color of her hair in candlelight. "Different how? Lighter. Like you've finally put down something heavy you've been carrying." Elena looked up from her paperwork and studied his face. "So are you. You smile more now. Real smiles, not the careful ones James Chen used to wear." "Maybe because Michael Thompson doesn't have to be perfect. He just has to be honest." They were interrupted by a knock at the door, unexpected and sharp. David and Elena exchanged glances. They'd been careful about avoiding unnecessary attention, about keeping their new life as private as possible. David opened the door to find a woman in her 60s standing on their porch, her silver hair perfectly styled, despite the mountain wind. Elena's blood turned to ice when she recognized Margaret Chen. "May I come in?" Margaret asked, her voice carrying its familiar authority. "How did you find us?" David's voice was tight with tension. "I've always known where you were. I've been watching from a distance, making sure you were safe." Margaret stepped inside without waiting for permission, her eyes taking in their modest home with something that might have been approval. "You look happy." "We are happy," Elena said firmly, "which is why, whatever brought you here, the answer is no." Margaret's smile was sad but genuine. "I'm not here to ask you to come back, Elena. I'm here to tell you that you're free." "We're already free." "No, you're still hiding, still looking over your shoulders, still afraid that someone will discover who you really are." Margaret moved to their living room window, which offered a spectacular view of the mountains. "But that's over now." David joined Elena on the couch, their hands automatically finding each other. "What are you talking about? The man in Portland, the one who was using James's identity, he's dead. Really dead this time. And with his death, all the loose ends that threatened to unravel our carefully constructed story have been tied up." Elena felt her chest tighten. "You killed him." "I didn't have to. He died in the hospital 3 days ago, from complications related to his injuries. Natural causes, the doctors said. Poetic justice, I prefer to think." Margaret turned back to face them. "But his death means that you can stop running if you want to. You can come home." "This is our home," David said firmly. "Is it? Or is this just another place you're hiding?" Margaret's voice was gentle but challenging. "Elena, your gallery is still sitting empty in Millfield. I never sold it, never donated the contents. I kept hoping that someday you might want to reclaim your life." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "The gallery still exists. Everything exists. Your house, your bank accounts, even your car is still in the garage where you left it." Margaret pulled out a thick envelope. "All it would take is some creative storytelling, a breakdown, a brief hospitalization, a gradual recovery with the help of a caring friend." "James Chen would still be dead," David pointed out. "Yes, but David Kim could come back to life. The real David Kim with his real history, his real identity. We kept all of his records, all of his documentation. It's been waiting for 15 years for him to reclaim it." Elena felt the room spinning around her. "You're saying we could go back to our real names, our real lives. I'm saying you could stop hiding and start living as yourselves. Elena Santos and David Kim. Two people who found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and chose to build something beautiful together." David was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on Elena's hand. What's the catch? There's no catch. Consider it my wedding gift to you. Margaret's smile was warm, almost motherly. Because you are going to get married, aren't you? Michael and Jennifer are all well and good for playing house, but Elena and David deserve something real. Elena looked at the man she loved. James, David, Michael, it didn't matter anymore, and saw her own hope reflected in his eyes. We could really go home. You could really stop running, Margaret confirmed. The question is, do you want to? Elena thought about Mrs. Henderson and her Tuesday coffee visits, about the artists whose careers she'd been nurturing, about the life she'd built with such careful intention before everything fell apart. Then she thought about David Kim, the young artist who'd never gotten the chance to see what he might become, whose dreams had been buried under someone else's identity for 15 years. Yes, she said simply. We want to go home. 6 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of her gallery in Millfield, watching David, the real David, David Kim, hang his latest painting. It was part of a series he'd been working on called Resurrections, portraits of people who had lost themselves and found their way back to something better. Mrs. Henderson is coming in today, Elena said, checking her appointment book. She's finally ready to buy that landscape painting. The one that reminds her of her husband's fishing spot. The very one. She said she had a dream about him last week, and he told her it was time to stop visiting the memory and start living with it. David climbed down from the ladder and pulled Elena into his arms. She still wore a simple gold band on her left hand, but now it represented a new promise, a new beginning. They'd been married in a small ceremony in Whistler, before returning to Millfield with Margaret Chen as their only witness and the mountains as their cathedral. Any regrets about giving up our Canadian adventure? David asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Only that we can't ski to work anymore, Elena replied, laughing. But David, this feels right. Being here, being ourselves, building something real together. Even if that something includes awkward questions about where James Chen went and how Elena Santos survived her breakdown. Especially because of that. We're not hiding anymore. We're not pretending to be people we're not. Elena looked around the gallery at the art that reflected both struggle and hope at the life they'd rebuilt from the ashes of everything they'd lost. We're just Elena and David, two people who've been through hell and decided to love each other anyway. David's smile was soft, full of the kind of contentment that came from finally knowing who he was. Elena and David, I like the sound of that. Good, Elena said, standing on her toes to kiss him properly. Because we're stuck with it for the rest of our lives. As they worked together to prepare for the gallery's reopening, Elena found herself thinking about the paintings she'd been working on during the darkest period of her grief, those canvases full of blue and red and unexpected gold. She'd brought them back from Vancouver, and now they hung in the gallery's back room, a private exhibition of her journey from loss to love to rebirth. I want to show them, she said suddenly. Show what? My grief paintings. The ones I was working on when we first got together. I want to display them publicly, to let people see what it looks like to paint your way through the worst thing that's ever happened to you. David considered this, his artist's eye already imagining how the pieces might be arranged. It would be honest. Brutal, but honest. Exactly. No more hiding, remember. Not from our past, not from our pain, not from the messy, complicated truth of how we found each other. Then we show them, all of them. Let people see that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the darkest places. Elena felt tears threatening, but they were good tears this time, tears of gratitude for the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. I love you, David Kim. I love you too, Elena Santos Kim, He paused, testing the sound of their joined names. That has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The best ring I've ever heard. That evening, as they closed the gallery and walked hand in hand to the small house they now shared, Elena felt the last vestiges of her old grief settling into something manageable. Something that would always be part of her, but no longer defined her. She'd learned that love didn't erase loss. It transformed it, gave it meaning, turned it into something that could nurture new growth. Behind them, the gallery windows glowed with warm light, displaying art that spoke of resurrection and renewal of two people who had lost themselves and found each other. Tomorrow, Mrs. Henderson would buy her painting and finally take her husband's memory home where it belonged. Tomorrow, other visitors would see Elena's grief series and perhaps recognize their own pain reflected in those bold strokes of blue and red and gold. But tonight, Elena and David walked home together through the quiet streets of Millfield, two people who had been given the rarest of gifts, a second chance at life, at love, at the kind of happiness that could only be built on a foundation of complete and devastating honesty. They had lost everything and gained each other. They had died to their old selves and been reborn as something stronger, something real, something worthy of the love they'd fought so hard to claim. And for the first time since that rainy November night, when everything began, Elena wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She was ready for it, whatever it held, as long as she didn't have to face it alone. As they reached their front door, David paused to look back at the town where they'd found each other, lost each other, and found each other again. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For seeing me. Really seeing me even when I didn't know who I was." David unlocked their door and pulled her inside into the warmth and light of the life they'd built together. For loving David Kim enough to let James Chen die. Thank you for letting Elena Santos grieve and heal and become someone who could love again. Elena kicked off her shoes and settled into David's arms on their second-hand couch. For being patient while I figured out the difference between honoring the past and being trapped by it. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had learned that the most profound love stories weren't about finding your other half, but about becoming whole enough to choose someone else's wholeness too. They had been broken separately and healed together, had lost their identities and found their souls, had discovered that sometimes the end of one story was really just the beginning of another. Outside, Millfield settled into evening quiet, a small town full of ordinary people living their ordinary lives. But inside their small house, Elena and David held each other and marveled at the extraordinary fact of their survival, their love, their stubborn refusal to let tragedy have the final word. They had chosen each other across death and deception, across loss and lies, across every obstacle that had tried to keep them apart. And now, finally, they were free to love without guilt, free to heal without shame, free to build whatever future they could imagine together. It was more than enough. It was everything.